And there goes Pandora again, right on cue. Welcome everyone to episode 1 of Commitmas 2 2015 edition. Here to kick off the season with you tonight. My name is Jonathan Frappier, and we have the, I guess, founder of Commitmas, Matt Brender, with us. Matt, how's it going?
It's going well, Jonathan. I didn't even realize it was something to be founding, but yeah, happy to be back for year two and to start with some terrible clip art and some cross-pollination of holidays and puns.
Awesome. So uh, I guess one of the first things I'd like, or was hoping you'd cover, is maybe you could tell us what Commitmas is, how it came about, what you're hoping it is for folks, and we can kind of just launch into tonight's episode, which introduces people to GitHub, and go from there.
Yeah, love to. Okay, so really it came down to a year ago, I had been stumbling around GitHub for, about 6 months to maybe almost a year, really fiddling around. And I just learned so much better as part of this community. I think it's something that anybody that's part of vBrownbag or listening to this will appreciate, that we learn together and teach each other and push each other to be accountable for learning new skills that we need to for our career and for ourselves. So last year, I was switching roles and getting into developer advocacy, something that got me more exposure to open source, and I wanted to kind of test the waters and make a project that got other people collaborating online and through GitHub. Thus, a terrible pun came to mind called Commitmas that I thought I would follow on with Commitmica and other sort of holiday-themed events. But yeah, you fine gentlemen, Jonathan and Rob Nelson, who also deserves recognition, thought it was worth bringing back to round two. So when I think about it, like all I want people to get out of this is to understand that understanding GitHub itself, including Git and Markdown as prerequisites of this, are actually skills you have to pick up separately from saying, quote unquote, understanding open source or quote unquote learning to code. And I didn't see enough focus on that, so I wanted to fill the gap.
Awesome. So I think you've got a nice little schedule slide coming up here next, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I get to kick things off going over a little bit of what we did last year on the DevOps podcast on vBrownbag. But what is so impressive is that we have, almost 30 presentations all throughout the month of December, and I'm barely scratching the surface of it. So here's the next week's worth.
Yeah, it's I was Cody Bunch actually suggested the podcast webinar every day of the month of December for Commitments 2, and then quickly ran away so that I couldn't hit him all the way. He's down in Texas and I'm up here in Massachusetts, and I think I tried to throw some rocks that way when he suggested it, but I kind of took that as the challenge, and Rob jumped right in to make this all happen and help recruit folks, and which is one of the hardest parts. And I mean, this kind of came, close to 30 presentations, and we pulled that together in a couple of weeks was pretty amazing. So I'm looking forward to getting this rolling. Now, last
Yeah,
year
and
when
I also like the. Oh, go ahead.
nope, all you.
I was just going to say, I also like that you have everyone repeating the message, and you're going to find that that's going to be crucial because if there's anything I've learned about Git and GitHub is that it's all about exposure and repetition and practice. So even though I feel decently confident in my Git skills these days, I'm going to show up to as many of these as possible and watch all the recordings because the more I learn it, or the more I listen, the better I get.
Absolutely, and that was key last year. Just when we start going over tracks, maybe later on, and we talk about beginner tracks and intermediate tracks and whatnot. Just committing and doing some of the Git basics. If you're not doing it every day and working it into your workflow, I know I've had to go back to past blog posts and what was that command again to put that thing back in the spot that I forget what it's called. So repetition's key. We'll get all of these recorded. Obviously, I did hit the record button, right? Yeah, I hit the record button. Excellent. So we'll get these all up on YouTube for folks to catch up and watch anytime they want as well.
Great. All right. I'll
So
jump right in then, Jonathan, if you're good.
Yeah, take it away. I mean, I'd like to hear we kind of met uh, when our paths crossed career-wise. You were at EMC. I was getting more into virtualization. I'd be curious to hear how you've advanced and why you think this is important for folks.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I really started my career in enterprise IT in tech support at EMC, which is a great place to learn and a great place to leave. Happy that I did both of those things. I had the pleasure of meeting guys like you, along with Luigi, who really inspired me to get involved in these things. And just putting together a little timeline to give an idea of it, I've always been active in community building along the way. I find that to be the most rewarding part of my career and something that I really try every day to find a way to bring more community into my day-to-day work so that I am both better at it and can do more of it. The more you do, the better you get, the more people want you to do it. That's led me down a path that also reminded me that I really love code. I wouldn't say I'm good at it. I wouldn't say I'm like a professional programmer that wants to argue over semantics and learn a ton of languages. I just really enjoy getting in there and playing with it. So picked up Git out of necessity because the platform of choice for code these days is GitHub, and Git is the language to communicate on GitHub. So, I like to communicate with people, and I want to understand how to communicate, and you communicate through the version control system that we're going to dig into this month, as well as, learning some language along the way as well. So, to tell you a little bit more, I'm Matt Brender. I'm at MJ Brender on every platform I can take that name, which has been all of them. And happy to be podcasting with John Troyer and Amy Lewis on Geek Whispers. I blog a bit on Neckbeard Influence, and really proud to be at Intel these days as a developer advocate in the software-defined infrastructure team. But we're here to talk about Git and GitHub. So I'm going to get into GitHub itself. I truly think that I've never worked for them. They haven't paid me a dime, but I've gotten as many people as I can to join GitHub because I think it's like joining Twitter these days. It's where the conversation's happening, and the conversation is with developers, which I think is an overloaded term these days. There are tons of different type of developers, and I think all of us as people interested in infrastructure, if I can generalize the audience here, we are developers, but just of a different part of the stack. And I love realizing that. It's more equalizing and recognizing that GitHub as a platform as well as a set of languages and tools can become the lingua franca, the thing that brings us all together, or to throw more historical terms in there, like a Rosetta Stone. Like we can all understand each other if we're all using version control and all checking our code into a common platform. I think that's GitHub. I've seen no one else giving me a reason to look elsewhere. Anyone that's tried to has not succeeded very well. So that's my pitch for them, and we'll go more into version control itself, though, because I don't want to assume you know what version control is. And then we're going to talk more about vocabulary, because like learning anything new, there's a ton of tribal semantics that people use that you just aren't familiar with. Some of them have to do with how things are actually done in Git, and some of them are actually cultural, just like what you'll see on a pull request or in a branch or in comments. And I want you to be aware of both of those. And then we'll go into a few examples, because I think repetition is so crucial here and understanding how people do these, how people actually collaborate in code bases. Oh, I'm getting some lag on my side. Sorry about that. So how many people have been asked something along these lines in their day-to-day life? Find me the version that we used last time. And you ls out your folder, and you have, scripts or PowerPoint presentations or Word docs, and one of them almost inevitably says final in it, and then one almost inevitably says final, and then there are versions after that. So which is easier to know which one you use? The one on the left, where you have a bunch of, options, to put it kindly, or the one on the right, where there's one definitive answer. There's only one script to run. It's pretty obvious it's the one on the right, And that, in and of itself, that's what version control can give you. It gives you a single way of seeing the history of a script so that it can change, because code will always change, and scripts are code. But it changes in a consistent way with semantics that allow you to recover from those changes and understand where you've been and where you're going next. So here's a very well done versioning system. You have a script or some sort of command, you put a --s version out after it, and you get a semver notation of what the version is. If you're wondering what that is specifically, the 1.0.1, and how that's used, you should actually check that out. It's really interesting to look at semantic versioning, and I strongly recommend using that whenever possible. But this is how we usually do it, or at least this is how I was taught in tech support and when I joined engineering at EMC, and just how I rolled as a not refined developer. I would copy the file, and I'd have a .old of my Etsy host file, and I just, leave it there next to the original one, and that's kind of cool. But that's not version control. That is just making duplicate crap in the same repo in an unstructured way. So what does that mean? It begs the question, what is version control? And the way I sum it up, in my head at least, is that it's an ability to have checkpoints, clear, definitive checkpoints throughout your code base, throughout your scripting, throughout your behavior. It doesn't even have to be code itself. That gives you this annotated view of what you've done. When have I used it? When was the last stable version? When was the last time I was using it in this other way? And it gives you an ability to go look at that again. When we're talking version control with Git, we call these things snapshots or deltas, and we're tracking changes that are defined as blobs in a decentralized, collaborative way. But it doesn't really matter to me. It just means I know when the last good version of this code was. I know when the last time I deployed this code is. And I know what I'm working on next. So that's interesting only because I really want to work with other people. I myself, while I can in fact script something together or code something that works, I find that the world is a big, beautiful place filled with code, and I want to work with other people on it. So I think version control is true talent and true need comes when you think about any code where you're going to work with anyone else. Anytime somebody else might want to deploy what you're doing or update it and improve it, and you want to be able to pull that back into your original and have a sort of handshake agreement on how you're doing that, that's what version control is for. So how does that enable really interesting things? Two examples come to mind that make sense to my vBrownbag brethren and sister in the quote-unquote enterprise collaboration sort of way that was put tongue-in-cheek. We have Docker, which has just been, the star of late, with a ton of contributors, a lot of activity on GitHub itself, but just, a lot of people committing a lot of code all to a single collection of code that has improved it very quickly in a way that, say, if VMware's ESXi was just released today for the first time, you would probably open source it so that you can collaborate in real time and improve that very quickly. It allows for that fast iteration. OpenStack, while may not be the perfect example of collaboration in the wild, it does have a lot of activity that continues to refine it and continues to get more activity on different branches of it. So let's get down to it. Let's talk about GitHub and why I think it's really cool. By the way, that's Octocat. Octocat's their theme. They sell little miniatures of them. If you want to thank me for any of this, you can send me little miniatures of Octocat, and I'll love you. But here's my definition of GitHub. This is not in any dictionary and probably doesn't really deserve a lot of credit here. But Git is fundamentally just a distributed version control. The idea of version control being able to put versions on code, but not just do it in one place, but to do it in many places. A hub is some sort of connectivity thing for bytes. That's about as much networking experience as I have. But GitHub itself, it's really not about the version control. It's not about the bytes. It's about code this higher level idea, and people. And it's a multiple, not an individual thing. Also, excuse all the background. I'm in a hotel with a ton happening. It sounds like. So if you're wondering about GitHub, like, okay, so how much code and how many people? I just was looking at the numbers, and their most recent reports show 11.9 million users with over 30 million repositories of code. It's just unquantified. Well, it is quantified in front of us, but just the amount of things you could do with your day is just unbelievable just by jumping in there and digging around. There's too much to do, honestly. So that's why when we get into advice on how to play in GitHub, we'll get to some specifics. So some basics. When you're getting in there, whenever somebody is putting information in some sort of directory structure, that's called a repository. Done. You got that one. Branches is actually a little confusing in GitHub, but branching has this idea of, like a tree branch, but really it's just it's a separate copy of code in the same repository. So it can actually be a slight difference between one branch and another, say the master branch, which is the default one, and a develop branch. Maybe you'll be adding a feature in the develop branch, and you have a slight difference as you add that feature. Or it could be two totally different things. You could actually delete all the files in it and start another project and just keep it in one branch. That's where it gets a little confusing in GitHub, but just remember that branches are intended to be some slight variation from the master or the main branch. And then a commit is actually some collection of changes to objects in a GitHub repository, which you have put to your local index. You're basically your version of that repository. Remember, it's a distributed version control. So you have your version locally that you commit to, and then you have a remote one you will push to since we're dealing with GitHub. And I'll diagram that out in a bit. And then head is just a reference. It's think of it like just a variable that will stand for whatever the most recent commit is. And commits are tagged with these long hashes, which we will refer to and never really care about memorizing, like IPv6. Some more lingo, because I don't think people cover this nearly enough. When two people commit to the same file or same chunk of a file, you actually have something called a merge conflict, which means you have to manually go choose, do I want A or do I want B? You can't automatically resolve that. If you are working with a remote repository and there's actually been updates that you just haven't pulled locally yet, you can do something called a fast forward, and that will do a pull request and rebase and bring it locally. Again, more details that we'll get into and other people will cover in more detail. And a couple vocabulary terms that I find helpful. LGTM is looks good to me. You'll see that generally on a pull request before you get merged, which is a good thing. And ship it is another one where you might see this mobster squirrel who will tell you that your code is also ready to roll. So important thing to note when you're writing code or when you're committing code to Git, Git only sees things as blobs, not really as files. So let's take a little look-see. Okay, we're gonna actually look at the Commitmas, and we see inside here we go to Octocat. There's a file called holiday Octocat, but now I'm going to show you the holiday Octocat is the one we saw before, the pretty Octocat. What if I grab this other thing called holiday Octocat? It's actually a totally different file with a totally different cat in it, and just I'll drag and drop that. Oh man, it's a PNG and that's a JPEG. Whoops. Let's just rename that. Drag it so that we so we're on Git status. I actually see that there's changes that we haven't committed anywhere yet. So we recognize that there's been a change to the file holiday Octocat. What Git has no idea is that we totally replaced it with another file that looks absolutely different from it, because the PNG is just one big blob of information and it doesn't care. What's interesting about Markdown files, if you edit just part of a Markdown file, it'll actually chunk it and be able to merge the separate parts of a Markdown file if you have multiple commits to the same one. I just find that kind of interesting. So back to it. So all of this is kind of gets to this idea of how do we collaborate? Like, what are we actually doing if we're not just pushing our own information up to GitHub, but we're actually working with other people's code? And there are two strategies. There's a read-write repository where people have shared permissions on the same repo that we've been talking about, and then there's kind of what I just call fork and pull requests, which is a separate idea where everyone has at least read access to a repository, and then they update their copy of it. And I'll show some diagrams because that makes more sense. But really important to keep in mind that Git allows for local and remote copies of the same code. And actually, GitHub, by default, that's how you do everything. So if we pop over to GitHub real quick, look at what I have in here. Let's say we want to just grab this Ruby parse mail repository I have. I'm going to go over to my dev environment. And I'll clone that down if the internet gods will be kind to me. So now, actually, if I go into here, I have a local copy of the code that is up on GitHub here. But say if I delete that file, lazy get stuff, and we see we don't have it, if I refresh this page, it's still going to be on the page. They're not actually the same files. They're separated as two copies of each other. And I know where I'm pointed to with a git remote. We see that the origin, as this is called, which is called the remote, is actually to that repository that we were just looking at. So that's
We lost you, Matt. You still there? Hey, folks, sit tight with us for just a second, and it finally kicked him off. Let me work on getting Matt back online, and we will be back with you in a moment. All right, folks, if we're going to do this vBrownbag style, who wants to raise their hand and come on and chat for a little bit while we wait for Matt? Little post-show, in-show action. I've got the theme music going. Anyone? Hands up? Somebody wants to talk. Come on. Oh, there's Matt. He's back in as a regular person. Hold on a second. We got you back, Matt?
Hello?
Hello.
Hey.
Back?
I look like I am.
Sweet. Then, in that case, let's get back to it.
I apologize.
No worries. So I will make you presenter. Let me pause the festive music.
Oh, I kind of liked it.
You want to? I can keep it going.
No. I mean, you can save it for later.
Sweet.
Okay. All right. Thanks for those that stuck around for this. All right. The basic workflow on a day-to-day basis is really you code locally, you commit that code, and then you push it to the remote branch that you have on GitHub, whether you're working on your own or with a team, and then you repeat that process. It's really that simple. That looks in more lingo-oriented language. You add code to the staging area, so you do a git add, also known as the index. You commit to the local branch, so you're on a branch, you can always check it with git branch, and then you look at git commit -m with the details you're adding, and then you push that to the remote branch with a git push. Let me show you a little. Okay, so we deleted that file. It's a terrible idea that I do this, so let's actually change branches real quick. We're going to check out a new branch. I'm going to call it breaking things. And we can see that it brought over the deletion I did on that last branch. All right, cool. But I actually know if I do a git status, which will run all the time, I have an unstaged commit. So I've deleted that file. Git doesn't know it yet locally in my local copy because I haven't committed it. So I'll do a git add. I can add just the individual file, or if I want to add just all changed files, I just put a period. That's what I normally do. Git status. Okay, we've changes to be committed. They're still not committed though. If I look at like say git log, there's nothing that's been different since the last update that I did to this on Wednesday, July 15th. So I haven't actually added anything. So I actually need to do a git commit. And then I'm a firm believer in commenting because the whole point of version control is a shared history. So why don't we say what we're doing? Breaking stuff as a demo. This is live on Commitmas. Cool. So you'll notice that I close the quotes out. You can do multiple lines. The first line always shows up in a commit. The other ones are just for comments. And if I add things, like if I add IDs on GitHub, this will actually tag that person and bring it up in their profile. And then we get a new hash of this where it's called breaking stuff as a demo. Changed one file, deleted 6 lines because that's all it was, and boom. If I do a git status. Cool. Breaking things, there's nothing to commit because everything we've done locally has been committed. So next, I would push this remotely. I'd do a git push, and then since I'm on a new branch, I'd also want to say what that branch is, but let's make sure we have a remote set up. So a remote's called origin, and it goes to the same repo that we're working in. So we do git push origin space breaking things because I want to make that same branch upstream. And I would click enter, but it seems like that kicked me offline last time in the sketchy hotel Wi-Fi, so let's not do that. And you just do that. You push, then you do a git add again, and then you commit, and then repeat, don't even rinse, just keep repeating until you get bored. So what does it look like if people are sharing a repo where that's literally all you have to do? You just have to push to that common repository, and then other people will push to that common repository. So let's say that we have 3 people. We've got blue, purple, and green. They're all sharing, they'll have shared permissions, read-write access to the same repository. This, for example, is how we have the CommitMiss repo set up under the CommitMiss team. It's a shared repository with read-write access. Kind of dangerous, as you can imagine. It's like having read-write access to the same disk. Of course, you can erase each other's stuff, but it's also empowering because people can iterate very quickly if you trust each other. So let's say to start that purple downloads the repository. This would be a git clone on that repository, as we showed recently. And then she has some updates she wants to push up to it. So that would be, say, git add dot, and then git commit -m, and then git push origin branch name. Cool. And then actually it's as easy as blue just doing a git fetch and a git pull to be in sync on his local branch from what edits had happened on since purple had updated it. The alternative is to do forking with pull requests. And this is much more common since we don't have write access to other people's repositories by default. Anything that's in my folder is just mine, or anything that's in my account is just mine, unless we share a team where we then have, unless we share an organization that has a team that allows you more than read access. So you start by forking it. You click the fork button. There are command lines to do it, but I still just click the fork button because it's easier. And on that fork, that makes a separate remote repository from the original repository. So if I'm purple, I've forked the original repository, and now I have my own copy of it remotely. I then download that locally, so we're up to 3 copies of the same repository. Then say I push up to that remote repository of mine. If blue is the original owner of the repository and wanted to bring in my updates to my fork, they would do a merge request. They'd actually merge in the updates that I added to that remote repository in a new commit. This will not make sense at first. This is one of the most confusing workflows, and there's 1,000 different iterations of it, but I just wanted to give you an example. So let's go through the basics again. So we add code to the staging area, aka the index. We commit to a local branch. We push it to a remote branch, most often called origin by default, and we repeat. With actual commands, or at least pseudo commands, I always end up running git status because when I jump into a repository, I don't actually know what my status is. Like, what are we doing here? I broke Octocat, so I do git status in the 30 days of CommitMiss, and we got a change that has not been staged, so we next would do a git add. Okay, git status. We've changed. We have not committed it, but it's been added, and we note that it's been modified. You also might notice that my command prompt gives me little indicators of what's going on with Git. That's thanks to Z shell. Happy to talk people through that if they're interested in it. I think it's worth the energy. If I'm collaborating with other people, I might need to do a git pull rebase and pull in any changes they've had. If I have any edits that I haven't yet committed locally, I actually stash them. So that's the new term. There's a command, so we haven't actually committed this, and I don't want to yet because I might have changes upstream from, say, Rob, who's working on something, or Jonathan. So I do a git stash, and that actually takes the changes we made, changing the holiday Octocat from one cat to another, and it just puts it into some magical queue someplace. You don't actually have to understand it. And we just go back to where we were before. So we do a git status where we're back to normal. And now if I looked at, say, Finder, this is in the folder where we edited the cat. We see the original cat. Because what we actually did, we went back to the original reference point by stashing the change. We basically, it's like it never happened. And that's the beauty of version control. I know it happened, and I know I can get it back, so I can kind of jump between states a little fearlessly once I get used to it. Because I know if I want to bring that back, let's say I do a git pull-s rebase and bring in whatever external commits have happened. I know I need those because I ran a git fetch beforehand. I'm not going to run any of this because it's breaking my demo right now. At any point, I just do a git stash pop, and boom, I bring that change that I had on the queue back. And you can push and pop things as needed, which is just really, really handy when you're collaborating with people. So stage changes, pull for the rebase, pop after it so that you add your changes on top of their changes. And then you'd push to upstream, which would be a separate remote from your origin since we have multiple copies. And you might need to add that. So you might need to add a git remote add upstream and the URL to the other upstream. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. Or actually, why not right now? So if we do a git remote -v on the 30 days of CommitMiss, no, that's silly. I was lazy. I only copied directly from the CommitMiss account, so we can see. But what I should have done is fork it initially, and then I would do a git remote add. I generally call mine just mine, so I know the difference. And it would be this address, but instead of the CommitMiss organization owning it, it would actually be my copy of it, which would be :MJ Brender and then the name of the repo. And then adding that, I'll be able to push to either of those copies. It gets a little confusing. You got to understand the different states of the different branches and where have I actually pushed that code and where I haven't. But it's incredibly convenient in the ability to just coordinate across multiple repos, your own copy and other copies. But we'll exit out of that. So long and short of it is that there's some simple rules to enjoy GitHub. And it's really to just use it every day. I actually find I couldn't think, I realized I had no idea how Markdown worked, which is annoying because no one talks about that. Markdown is yet another thing you have to learn in order to understand GitHub well enough, since all the files are rendered. Any sort of README file or other file is written in Markdown, so it's a prerequisite that no one tells you, and it just takes a little bit of time to focus on. So I just started making repos where I gathered up information and I put it into Markdown files so that I had an excuse to practice every day. So do that. Find excuses. Find things you can document and share publicly. Put stuff on GitHub in version control and then link to it on your blog or send it out to somebody on Twitter. Instead of sending them an email that explains something, write it in Markdown, put it in GitHub, and send it to them. It gives you a good reason to do so. And then probably the most important thing by far is to be patient, because I'm a hot mess in Git sometimes. I just sit there wondering, like, how the heck do I get back to the state that was working, and what did I not do? How do tags work? How do post-commit? How do commits work with hooks? The more I learn, the more I realize I have no idea what I'm doing, which is where this graphic really inspires me. I'm pretty sure I'm in the first phase of beginner, because I don't think I'm an expert yet, but I'm getting close enough where I'm probably going to be a hazard soon. And then, which really, in the spirit of CommitMiss, partner up with people. Find a buddy, find a peer that is also working on their skills, and work with him or her, and just really find an excuse to practice. It's the only way to get anything out of this. Learning by doing. So let's take a second to practice. You can answer these in your own head, since I don't trust my connection to work well with people responding on Twitter like I originally planned. But what's the term for this? I've made an edit to a copy of a repository I created, and when I try to push it to origin, it says nothing committed. What didn't I do? If you're in the situation, helpful to run git status to figure out where you are. 3, 2, 1. Needed to add that commit in order to be able to push that to the remote repository, because first we check our status, then we add it, then if we try to push it, we would just get, hey, everything's up to date because there's nothing committed locally that needs to be pushed to upstream. But once you actually add it, it changes everything. It actually makes it something tracked inside the references to in Git, and then will be something that's pushed up as another blob. All right, another question. I have edits I want to share with the original repo owner. What do I do? Might seem tricky, but I really think git remote-v is the most helpful command to remember here. Because what you really want to do is you want to open a pull request. So you're going to actually push code to your copy of that person's code so that you're able to then go click through the UI and open a pull request. Here's an example of one I opened earlier today, which was actually giving you challenges to go work on after this. So I opened the pull request by making a separate branch called MJB challenge, and then I pushed that separate branch, MJB challenge, up to the CommitMiss repository, and then I went actually into the UI, clicked the button to create a pull request across branches, and then you see the commits, you see the conversation we were having, or just I was having with myself. Oops. And then you go from there, and it can get merged in, but probably not something you're going to do at first because you're in learning mode, or it could get improved. Actually, the thing I didn't realize at first is that when you open a pull request, it's still tracking whatever branch you have remotely that is the other point of contact. So you can go push more commits to an open pull request, and it stays open and keeps updating. So somebody might give you a comment in a pull request, actually can you like remove this syntax or add this other note? You give them a thumbs up and go do that, and then you commit it, or you add it, you commit it, you push it, and it will actually show up in the pull request. So you don't need to like close something and then reopen it. But say you want more, even more. These are a few of my favorite resources. I find the images that I stole are from the Atlassian workflows, which I just recommend cracking a beer, sitting down, and walking through these, and they give you a very well conceived group of people that are collaborating, and this is what happens specifically when this happens. When things go wrong, which will happen a lot when you don't know what you're doing, like all of us are, Git from the Trenches and Git Tutorial are both fantastic resources. I search from them regularly. And then I've been trying to post more and consume more from Stack Overflow, which seems to have all the answers to all the things, sometimes with some aggressive, snarky people, but sometimes with just some very friendly, helpful people. And that's it. I hope you have a lot of fun playing around in CommitMiss 2, the month of merriment. And I really appreciate Jonathan and Rob for letting me continue to be involved in it. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you very much. We do have a question from the audience since we are live. The question is from Anthony, and it is, if I get cloned to my local machine, make changes, but the changes are wrong, right? So a few days later, the kind of master repository has changed through other commits the developer working on it. I'm assuming here he's forked a repository. What's the best way to kind of start over if he just wants to nuke those bad things in his local environment?
Oh, cool. Okay, so we've got this breaking changes. Well, okay, let's stick with that example. So you have a fork of that repository. So let's assume we forked the original repository because you're contributing back to somebody. So you have a separate copy remotely on GitHub connected to your copy, or connected to their original copy, and then you clone it locally. I'm actually drawing this out, so it would actually be helpful to just do some quick diagram. So you have the original copy of GitHub repository. You have forked it in order to contribute to it. So that's your copy. And then you brought it locally. So you are committing to this. And then you've pushed that commit up to this repository. And now, let's say you were about to want to share it over to this very original repository, the person that originally had it, but you found that this commit is useless. For whatever reason, it's not accurate anymore, or there's been another commit upstream. Let's say they have, +1 commit, and you actually realize, well, that commit makes this one irrelevant, so I'm going to delete this commit. So there's actually two things we want to do in this case. We want to delete our commit, and we want to get to a place where our remote and local repositories are in sync with the +1 commit from the original repo. And that's where it gets confusing. You have to take it one thing at a time. So I would start with the local repository, because that's all you can edit really directly. And you would probably do a git reset. Well, let's say you do a git log and you look at your commits, and you just want to get rid of the last commit or maybe the last 2 commits. Lining that up gets a little tricky, and I'd want a better example to do that. But I'd do a git reset hard head delta 2 to go back 2 from head, which is our current status. And then we're back to where we were 2 commits ago. And then if I wanted to bring so that would take care of getting rid of the crappy commit locally. Boom, that's gone. But now we need to push it up to this one. So I would do a git push origin master, and probably a force, or you might actually do I think you could do a commit of some sort and then push it up as a difference. But it depends on whether you want to capture the edit you made and basically say it was an edit that's not necessary, or whether you want to just erase it and go back to where you previously were. So there's a lot of things to consider. I would probably just reset back a couple, go back to where you were before it, since no one else has seen that commit and they don't care that your commit shouldn't be merged. And then you would do a git fetch on the upstream that you have set up. So you'd set up a remote upstream for this repository. You'd fetch it, and then you'd do a git pull rebase. And then you would have this +1 commit here and here, and you've reset from that commit. That was a very non-trivial example, which explains why people get confused doing this stuff. Hope that helped.
Or as the XKCD comic would say, just delete your local copy and do a new one.
Not gonna lie, for probably the first year of using GitHub, when I couldn't figure out how to do something, I'll just blow away a repo and re-download it. rm-rf, and then git clone and start over. There's always a more graceful way to do it, but if you don't know it in, say, under 5 minutes, just give yourself a break, be patient, and just recognize you don't really care. Not yet, at least.
Yeah, and it's all about learning, so what you don't know just means you're going to learn something new that day.
Yeah, but that example is actually a great one. So when I was working at Infinio, I had access to our core repo, and I wanted to update some README info, and it got a little confusing if I had the latest updates. So I'd have to make sure I stash some changes and fetch from upstream, and then push mine on top of it, which is why I recommend that workflow when working with a ton of an active project upstream. I found that to be helpful. It's not the only way to live. There's probably smarter ways depending on the way you set up your branching strategy, which is a totally another spectrum of this, because remotes aren't just per repository, they're also per branch. Um, so if I check out master again in this example, this is a totally separate collection of code that I have to track versus the breaking things branch of code. And whether or not I have a remote for that branch is actually depends on how I set up the repo. I know some other people are getting into it. There are some magical files that you will learn to love, like your git config file that you keep in your home directory that has just a ton of very helpful things, including git ignore that I know somebody's going over, and some merge, but like there's some merge conflict resolution it can do for you. There's some tracking information it can do for you. The colors I have are set in this. So I've got a lot of pretty stuff in mine that I found to be helpful, and those are actually all on GitHub in my .files folder. So if I so on GitHub, you'll see .files, and that's just like all my copies of how I keep my personal stuff organized. And you can actually redeploy that on your own system. I don't recommend doing it blindly unless you want to try to steal my identity. But there's some really helpful tips in there, including your bash rc file, your my Z shell config file, and like git config, and a ton of other stuff.
Awesome, Matt. Well, thank you very much for kicking off Commitmas 2015, a month of merriment.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan, and really can't echo it enough. Ask questions, use the platforms we have out there. You'll see a link to a Slack team that we've been running where people can ask very silly questions and are happy about it. And also, like, if you're willing to get right into it, there's a couple different routes you can take. In CommitMiss, there are three levels of challenges you can do every day to improve your Git skills, or you can go to the daily ones of the authors, including I have one in there for you to fork a markdown repository I have and then push some ideas back to me. So please do that. I'm happy to merge and or give you other sort of indicators on how to use the GitHubs.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed tonight, and have a Merry Commitmas.